And in terms of, in terms of the was there a particular reason for starting? Without trashing any of your previous employers, but you're getting fed up. Did you see an opportunity? What was the catalyst, I suppose, in terms of the decision to set something up yourself?
I guess it was just seeing how the data center sector was operating relative to the established areas of property. There is no drama in any other property about asking about what's your availability, like how big of how big's your space, what's your capacity, like what's going on in the market, what are your rents doing. That's just something that was in the data centers. It's a sort of you have kind of people clutching their pearls when people even ask, like, where are your data centers, and they're, well, we can't tell you that. And I think it was really looking at how data centers were presented versus any other asset class, and thinking that surely it behooves that a better informed person will make better informed decisions. And that was the simplest premise of DC Byte, was just trying to create something where people could very easily access all of the information on what's going on in all of the parts of that sector. So the traditional response, from the existing research houses has been along sort of a kind of almost kind of myopic focus on co-location. And of course, what's happened in reality is that you've got this dynamic balance that's going on, where it's not just been a one-way journey from, traditional telcos and banks building their own data centers to going into colo, which is then going into a wholesale kind of colo market. Instead, what we're seeing is something a bit more dynamic, where sometimes end users are choosing to build their own facilities now, predominantly the hyperscalers, but sometimes they're building their own, sometimes they're going to colo, sometimes it's a mix of both. And what you need is the ability to understand what's going on both in the rental sector and the own sector in order to understand the dynamics of the market. It's like looking at the housing market in the UK by only looking at rentals. It doesn't, you're only going to see one part of the equation if you're only looking at one bit. So that was it, really. And then the other thing was that when people say, oh, we just simply don't do it, well, that's fine, but we're going to come up with our best estimate of what is going on in your facility, based on the planning applications that you've made, based on your press releases, based on satellite photography, based on environmental impact assessments. Like, you can we want everyone to come with us. And what we have been working on is this basis of, tell us what you're comfortable with to start with. And then when you see that that's fine, then you can tell us a little bit more. And we're not trying to rush anyone, and we're not trying to say to them, well, we're going to find out regardless. What we're saying is, it's better for market research if we can come to an opinion of what we think is there, and work to improve that every single time we review it, which is, we review every property once a quarter. So, that means that we are always on a path to improvement. It also means that we are happy to acknowledge where we've found errors in the past, and we can work to correct them. So it's, should we say, it's celebrating the fact that, like, our information is imperfect. It's still a million times better than anyone else, but it is always imperfect. And so long as you're happy with that, and so long as you're able to manage that, it means that you can actually get beyond a certain kind of I say problem that a lot of the people have had up until now, which is, if I give you no information because I can't be 100% certain of it, well, I'd rather give you information that we are 99% confident about. So it's a different kind of philosophy, I guess, in terms of how we've done it.
And in terms of the customer, so obviously you're engaging with the data center community, and as you pointed out, that's fairly varied in terms of enterprises and colos, hyperscale, all that. But in terms of the customers, are they sort of engaging and paying for that, or is it people who want to understand the market, to strategies and where there are gaps and all that? So how does that work? So what's your customer profile, if that's?
It's everyone. We've had institutional funds, data center operators, public bodies, small investors, large investors, We have had developers who are wanting to get into the industry. We've had suppliers. Like, any time that you are thinking about getting involved in digital infrastructure, which, let's face it, is, it's the biggest sector, and by far the highest growth. And if you're traditionally investing in, say, offices, well, there's not going to be a lot of office development going on, and certainly not in 2020 there wasn't. And in 2021, there's like, you've seen net asset values on these big, property REITs, halving overall. And so you've got a choice. You can either go into data center or logistics. So a lot of people are now looking at increasing their proportion of investment into data centers. So what you're seeing is very, very deep pockets, but just having deep pockets is not enough. You need to have good intelligence combined with deep pockets. And even then, it's not even a matter of necessarily having deep, like a less well-funded, more dynamic type of company is going to do better in this environment than someone who is just merely wanting to pile $1 billion into investing in London and Frankfurt, where everyone is investing in those markets, and all that's doing is pushing up land prices and pushing up capacity without necessarily increasing your chances of a successful letting off the back of it. So, sorry, I was blinded by the sun there. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and in terms of the markets, I mean, you mentioned obviously the flap, and then some people add Dublin into that. I'm not quite sure how you pronounce flap with a D on the end, but that's obviously the strong market. But are you seeing activities outside those traditional core areas as well with the work you've been doing?
Yeah, it's really, I mean, it's pretty remarkable. In the last sort of 12 to 18 months, we have seen a dramatic shift in regionalization of data center activity. So we're still looking, we're just going through our kind of quarterly figures at the moment, but take up across the core markets, if you're looking at the activity all in, so for example, Frankfurt and Amsterdam and London this year have had great years. Dublin has had a pretty poor year by comparison, but because Dublin is lumpy, big, massive hyperscale facilities. But broadly, so if you count 2019 and 2020, 2019 full year, 2020 full year, you look at the two, and actually, in each quarter, it looks like it's done very, very well. But if you account for Dublin, then 2020 and 2019 have been about the same. In that same time period, take up in the non-flat markets across EMEA has increased by 85%.
Wow.
So it's, we're still, when you think it's like extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and it's something that we're just reviewing now. But in the first cut of the data, as we've seen it, take up in the new markets. I mean, and let's face it, the flats account for about 52% of all of the capacity in the markets across EMEA. So by no means is it the case that you can only invest in those markets. So the fastest growing markets, if you're looking at by megawatts right now, and I'm excluding the sort of sub 50 megawatt markets, if you're looking by megawatts right now, then yes, Frankfurt, London, Amsterdam and Dublin have the highest new capacity coming on stream. But if you're looking at the activity at the moment in terms of the percentage increase of quite substantial markets, then the flats are sort of in the middle, and the lead markets are Warsaw, Milan, Copenhagen, and Madrid. You've got in Copenhagen, for example, like that was a tiny little telco market until about 3 years ago, and then you had Apple, Facebook, and Google pile into that market at almost exactly the same time as they saw a slight kind of reduction in the development of new schemes in Dublin. And I think there's probably no surprise there that what you're seeing is the Irish data center market, almost having these issues with supply and constraints of available stock and land. And then at the same time, you have the tax benefits of basing yourself in Ireland winding down. So are you familiar with the double Irish with the Dutch sandwich scheme?
Yeah.
So essentially it was a completely legitimate scheme, but it allowed if you based your operations in Ireland and then had a separate entity over in the Netherlands, and then a Irish-owned company in, say, the Cayman Islands, something like that, then essentially you had a mechanic that would allow you to essentially pay very low or even zero tax. Okay, I'm not an accountant, but that's my rough understanding of the scheme. And that was legislated out of Ireland in 2015, and it was phased out between 2015 and 2020. So there is no longer a substantial tax incentive for you to base your operations and base your new operations in Ireland. Okay, so that's not to say that Dublin is not going to continue to grow. I think what we're going to see is more of an organic growth. You just had this announcement in the last couple of weeks of Amazon with their couple of new campuses around Drogheda, I think the pronunciation is. So it's absolutely not. And then you've got, between Echelon and Engine Node as well, you've got some really big build to suit, or big kind of hyper wholesale type schemes going live. But what we are seeing is now, in Madrid, for example, you've got Amazon has got not one but 3 campuses that they're developing now around Zaragoza in the northeast of the city. And exactly the same time, you also see NTT piling in from 2019-20. Data 4, and then more latterly NTT piling in. You've got the Telefonica sale, what's now Nabiax. They seem to be doing really, really well as well. There are rumors of other activity, but clearly, Madrid has gone from a kind of sort of 80-ish megawatt market to one which is, going into be a couple of 100 megawatts in a short amount of space. Then at the same time, you've also got things like Milan, where there was this sort of fits and spurts thing where it always been a bit of a telecoms hub. And then between sort of 2014 and 2016, you had, Data 4 really starting to make inroads there. And then you had SuperNap Italia opening up. And then again, it's just in the last couple of years when there were announcements of new public cloud regions coming in, from, I think it was from all of them. It was AWS, Google, and Microsoft all, made announcements of new public cloud regions, and those, that is now, I think Milan is now the fastest growing market that we have by percentage in Europe, certainly. And then Warsaw has been a bit of a dark horse. That's come from again, a bit like Copenhagen, but it seems to have gone a different route. Whereas with Copenhagen, it's self-build, hyperscale activity, which is driving the growth of that. Not exclusively. I mean, you've got Bulk, who have, done a great job of building a really nice, scalable wholesale offering in Esbjerg in the west of the country. But in Warsaw, you've got these, between Edge Connects with now 3 facilities. They bought a site in off an existing, I think it was the what was it now, the Citic data center, something like that. Anyway, they bought a small kind of carrier hotel type facility, and then they followed through with 2 more data centers very recently there. At the same time as Vantage piling into the market, we hear rumors of other activity there, but not enough substance on it so that we can start to kind of put that into stats. But some really, really interesting activity. And now what we're seeing is an increased kind of appetite for even, like, I'm not going to say more speculative markets, because there are very strong fundamentals as to why people should go there. So Istanbul, for example, okay, you have 2 things going against Istanbul up until now. One is the political environment is a little bit squirrely. And then the second is that the telecoms regulation there is incredibly tight. It's like in the UAE, it's incredibly skewed to favor the incumbents. And the flip side of that is that you have a country with, 80 million population, strategically located across Europe and Asia, large developed economy, and a high level of internet usage, and a young population. Like all of the things that you look at, like, what do people need data centers for? Public cloud, streaming, all of those services that go with like modern living. And then you think that the footprint of the Turkish data center market is like 25 megawatts. It just doesn't even figure as to why that is. And then you get really interesting developments like the Microsoft announcement with Athens. They'll be building a big data center campus there, and I think that one took everyone by surprise. But of course, data center development is determined by the needs of technology. And technology defines itself by change. So we shouldn't be looking backwards and thinking about data centers as traditional real estate assets where, well, the growth has been this much for the last 5 years, therefore we should assume that it's not going to be more than 20% above or below that amount for any forthcoming years. The reality is, if there is a need, there will be data center space deployed there.
And in that sort of expansion you described, is that just sort of natural in the sense that the hyperscalers you refer to mainly, they've started, they sort of cherry pick the biggest, most developed markets and obviously service those first, and now they're going to the sort of what we call tier 2 or however so the next level? Because I mean, obviously those countries, whether you visit them or whatever, you can see that they're maybe not as digitally enabled as as the ones we know of in Western Europe. Is that what's going on, or is there more to it than that? Are there particular sort of reasons why they're focusing in those areas, or it's just because it's round 2 of the expansion program?
I think it's some push and pull factors. So I think the push factors are, I think I mentioned, grids that just simply cannot take the quantity of demand that data centers are putting on them. I mean, I think I worked out that data centers in the UK probably now amount to about 2.5% of all consumed power. And yet that is almost entirely concentrated along London and the M4 corridor, and that number is probably going to set to double in the next 5 years. So about 5% of power consumption. And of course, at the same time, that's true of Frankfurt, that's true of Dublin, that's, to a lesser degree, true of Amsterdam, although the moratorium kicked in because there was the competing demands of the electrification of homes, heatings, and getting rid of gas there. But no, in terms of the sort of push factors, it's the constraints of the power grid and land prices which were going silly, and even just the simple availability of land. I think the other thing is that a traditional wholesale colo environment was based around building your data centers close to other data centers so that you could run your own dark fiber network between them so that you can essentially benefit and or poach from each other's facilities. That was a nice kind of setup. Well, with big, public cloud deployments now, a public cloud doesn't need to be hooked into dozens of other data centers because it does that through its own fiber backbone, into the IXPs, and then off it goes into the world. So I think the push factors have been fairly convincing that the markets are just taken they're a victim of their own success. The pull factors on the other side, well, there's lots of them. You're hedging yourself from a data sovereignty perspective because you're not putting all of your eggs in one digital data sovereignty basket. You have the advantage of state, of at a time when tech giants are increasingly under the scrutiny of governments. If you are investing in more countries, then more governments are able to see the benefits of your participation, and that you're not seen as some distant just consumer of all of your customers' data and wallets, and that you're not actually investing in their country themselves. So I think there is, I call it like gin boat diplomacy, that's sort of way that you can kind of bring people on side. And then I think there are some logistical reasons as well. Just, when it comes to content and when it comes to trying to take the stress off the kind of backhaul, the more distributed your data centers, the less backhaul bandwidth is taken up, and therefore the less your costs are in terms of data transit. And if you consider that, like telecoms networks are toll roads, like the more stuff that you ferry the further distance, the more it's going to cost you. It's exactly the same model as why UPS or DHL have a nice distributed network where they have a combination of of large, medium, and small sized distribution networks. And it's not just edge; it's edge, and it's also a mixture going forward. So yeah, I think there are a number of reasons, and the talent pool, I think, is another one. I think there is only so much you can pay someone, but then there are people who have got their roots put down in a country and they don't want to go and live in you know, the Arctic Circle in Hamina to go and work for Google or something like that, you know. And so there's only so many, you know, remote facilities that you can build, and there's only so many, you know, mechanical engineers who are living in Dublin or London or Frankfurt. And after a while, it just makes more sense that you can access a larger talent pool by building your data centers in Madrid or Copenhagen, where there's, you know, there's lots of good qualified engineers who, you know, can have the aptitude and the skills to slot right into the employment pool. And I know it's one of the issues that everyone's been having lately, which is, you know, the recruitment. I'm not going to call it a recruitment crisis, but it's certainly a recruitment challenge, you know, within the industry.